Good morning to all the viewers that have joined us today on another Indic talk organized by the Center for Indic Studies by the University of Indus. Today we have our speaker, Anjali Kanojia ji, who is a PhD, an academician, author, researcher, and yoga practitioner. Her graduate training is in public policy and public administration from the University of Houston, and her yoga certification is from Vyasa Yoga University, India. Her teaching and research interests are Indian and American politics, public opinion, assessment, general health policy, and comparative health modalities such as yoga and meditation. Her first solo book is The Politics and Promise of Yoga, Contemporary Relevance of an Ancient Practice, published by Lexington Books in 2022. I welcome you, ma'am, and I request you to take over from here.
Namaste, namaskaram. Thank you so much for having me on. The talk today is going to focus on yoga, and if you can kind of visualize a Venn diagram, imagine policy, imagine academics, and politics kind of being part of that. So I've given many talks on the efficacy of yoga, and today I want to kind of shift gears a little bit and focus more on the politics involved in yoga policy. I just want to kind of set the stage. In the US, yoga therapy or yoga modality, whatever you want to call it, falls under complementary and alternative medicine, or CAM, C-A-M. And the US National Institute of Health and the National Center for Complementary and Integrative Health provides definitions for what alternative therapies are, but there are diverse perspectives amongst practitioners, healthcare personnel, researchers, and policymakers regarding what yoga is and how it falls under the Western biomedicine. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So again, like I said, I'm going to be talking about three particular areas: academic, policy, and politics. Why? Like the so what question? Well, because yoga is a very important instrument, and we have seen that this particular tool, for this particular instrument, not just a philosophy, but actual practice, is has kind of taken over the world. And the other thing is, as the world kind of heals from the pandemic, we see a mental health pandemic also on the rise. So why yoga? Like, so what? Why are we even talking about this? Because yoga is here to stay, and it's best to understand all the nuances and perspectives about it. If we can go to the next slide, please. So starting out, evolution of CAM, complementary and alternative medicine. It took a while. There was a historical shift in how kind of CAM modalities became integrated into what we call the American landscape. They have not exactly been integrated into the Western biomedical model. So let me talk about this a little bit. So early definitions posed a little bit of a contention in how to kind of integrate what is known as traditional Chinese medicine, traditional Indian medicine, or any kind of ancient remedies from other cultures into the US healthcare landscape. And they were not widely taught in US medical schools, although there has been a little bit of a change where courses are being offered in alternative medicines. You see people doing continuing medical education hours in alternative medicine and such. So there has been a little bit of a change, but that integration has seen kind of a bumpy road in terms of how modalities like yoga are integrated into CAM. Again, CAM, the definition of CAM itself has changed over time. And terms like alternative and complementary were then eventually replaced with integrative, and then now integrated medicine. Integrative versus integrated, you see the narrative difference there. Something that is being integrated while something that is already integrated into the system. And now what we see is a little bit of a shift again, where we see words like complementary medicine, the word medicine associated with it, not just modality, not just therapy, but medicine. The same thing with, we see the same thing in Same thing being utilized in terms of research and whatnot. Scholars are using these terminologies as well, not just healthcare practitioners. So here, CAM is both an amorphous category and also an evolving category at the same time. So it's really interesting to see how yoga fits in. So let me kind of jump into that. Then challenges for yoga integration. We can move to the next slide, please. Challenges for yoga integration into mainstream biomedicine. The challenges are in, of course, the changing definition of complementary and alternative medicine, and also a lack of consensus on what complementary and alternative medicine is. And even a bigger issue here is an absence of a clear definition of what yoga is. We see that the NIH has kind of taken the top 10 common modalities or therapies, alternative therapies, and where yoga and meditation and breathing are kind of separate categories. So what yoga is not a clearly defined construct, because meditation being part of yoga, according to Maharishi Patanjali, right, being the eightfold path, meditation, breathing, pranayama, all of these things are part of yoga. But then here we see it kind of being parsed out. So CAM, as best as it tries, there's still a lack of clear definition of what yoga entails. So yoga's evolution in the West, primarily as a physical practice, has also kind of raised concerns about neglecting the non-physical components, such as the asana. The asana is the predominant one. So then, such as the pranayama and the meditativeness components. So the 10 most common health approaches listed by the NIH do include elements integral to yoga, but again, they are called deep breathing, mindfulness, progressive relaxation, and guided imagery. So what we would understand something as yoga nidra or dharana, dhyana practices are kind of, again, teased out apart from yoga and seen as separate constructs that are most commonly used. So this is itself is a problem. So I'm going to pose some of the policy problems here in how CAM is constructed and understood as is. So again, so what? This impacts stakeholders. Stakeholders meaning researchers, practitioners, students, teachers, policymakers, healthcare practitioners, meaning doctors, social workers, who are often at the front end when some patient goes and asks, hey, what type of yoga should I do? Like maybe the doctor doesn't know that perhaps meditation is part of yoga. So here, this becomes a huge challenge, and it is a huge challenge, especially when we are trying to integrate some of these modalities like yoga into mainstream biomedicine. Now, shifting gears, we'll go on to the next slide. The academic challenges. So I want to address the issues that we see. There are some methods-related challenges, and there are some nomenclature-related challenges. So again, lack of concrete definition for terms like yoga intervention is one, yoga therapy is one, medical yoga therapy, yoga chikitsa, yogapathy, yoga prescription versus like meditation, mindfulness, clinical yoga. We see all of these terminologies being used in the research papers that are coming out from behavioral scientists assessing, yoga for back pain or yoga for anxiety, yoga for depression. So there's no consensus on what yoga constitutes. Is it a therapy? Is it a prescription, right? What is medical yoga? We see terms like clinical yoga. This is all over the map, and researchers perhaps are not to blame in this because, again, the government, in terms of NIH, or even the Indian government, right, where the yoga originates, the source has not really provided a guideline of what entails what. So we see research papers all over the map with different definitions. And continuing with this, what other issues are posed is like researchers use these terms interchangeably, and this causes further confusion. And sometimes researchers are just kind of focused on proving like this therapy is right versus some other modality that is yoga, right? But rather than kind of seeing yoga as a whole, we kind of behavioral scientists get bogged down on like this particular sequence by this particular lineage or whatnot is right. So I want to talk about lineages too, maybe later on, because sometimes when researchers are seeking a yoga instructor, no one is taking care about or paying attention to what lineage, if there's a lineage for a particular instructor. So all of these things kind of get lost in yoga research. Another thing I want to bring up is like some incorrect practices and a major disconnect. I talked about the disconnect from lineages, but there are many variations that have come up. And one thing that has come up is American yoga. So American yoga is is considered to be a globalized form of yoga, which doesn't exactly constitute some of the things that are traditional aspects. May it be chanting, may it be saying Om, Namaskar, using Sanskrit terms, some or all of the above. So American yoga is a construct in itself that is, I guess, some way of attempting to either by on purpose or not, just by ignorance, kind of disconnecting yoga from the roots. So here, yoga research in academics is very complex, and some of the theoretical and methods related challenges, including nomenclature, prevail as is. So there needs to be somewhat of a standardization and guidelines provided in kind of helping improve research protocols. Okay, next slide, please. Other challenges are defining what yoga and meditation entails. We see that, of course, there's a lack of agreement on what yoga means, not just by NIH, but I think even whatever efforts the government of India has done, you might have something amazing on paper, but that implementation of it is a whole nother ballgame, right? I mean, I just saw the Indus University's sign and the logo, right? Theory and practice get married, they meet. Well, you can have a great theory, but if you can't really, assess it to the applied versions of things, it's not very useful. So this is where we find ourselves in terms of what is yoga, right? Who defines what meditation is? There are so many different aspects of meditation. Actually, meditation actually is a misnomer. A person reaches a meditative state. You don't sit and do meditation. Meditation happens to you because of certain things that you do. So here, nomenclature is a huge issue, and with now a new meaning, given yoga is probably 70,000 years old. New construct that is mindfulness, that is often associated with Buddhist practices, is another kind of I want to say, I am going to get flack for this, but a little bit of an impediment in how mindfulness, how meditation is perceived. Like, what is mindfulness? There's no clear definition of mindfulness either. So I want to point that out. There are many studies on mindfulness, and there's a researcher who came up with a protocol, MBSR, which is fine. I mean, it shows the protocol shows that it helps in various types of physical and mental health issues. However, there's no agreed upon definition there as well. So the number 4 point here is research and narratives. Sanskrit terms and concepts are often replaced with English terminology and concepts. Like I mentioned, guided imagery, which is usually what we would call yoga nidra, is kind of taken apart from its roots and kind of made into its own thing. I see on Twitter many Indian folks are calling out top journals where producing yoga-related papers, but without using a single Sanskrit term in it or calling it yoga. So these are the issues with yoga research in academia. Can we go to the next slide, please? So before we get into the politics aspect, I just want to make one more point about academics. Here, this is the need for kind of examining yoga critically and to understand it better from an Indological perspective. I think Indus University is dedicated to these things, and I think so is this Indic Talk initiative that they've come up with. But studying aspects that are from the subcontinent using the lens from the subcontinent is a must. So I just kind of want to point that out for under the academic section. Okay, now moving on to the politics. there is a lot of debate on yoga's religious identity. Many folks are unhappy with its association with Hinduism. Basically, in essence, the contention comes down to religion. Is yoga religion? Is yoga philosophy? Or is yoga a spiritual practice? And there's no doubt that Yoga Darshana is part of the 6 philosophies, the Shad Darshanas from the Indian subcontinent that kind of explain what existence is and what, who we are. And darshanas, of course, is a way of looking at ourselves. So there's actually, there should be no debate on where Yoga Darshana falls into the scheme of things. But from a political angle, there's a lot of, again, debate on yoga's religious identity. And under this point, I want to point out that this is where Buddhist yoga and Christian yoga and secular yoga, or spiritual yoga minus religious connotations, this is where all of these things fall under. People are just kind of trying to invent newer ways to disconnect from the roots. So this is what we see in terms of yoga's debate involving religious identity. The other thing is diverse views on yoga's own identity. So conflicting perspectives debate on not just whether yoga is Hindu, but has it transcended religious boundaries. So not just the Buddhist angle and whatnot, but also kind of a bit of globalization takes place here, to where yoga came, of course, originated in India, came to the US, right? Kind of did its thing in the US, got transformed, and then got sent back to the world, including to India. And that is what we see being practiced all around the world, including in the Indian subcontinent. So here are some conflicting perspectives on what yoga is and what is being practiced today. Integration and disagreement is one thing, mentioning the conflicting views within the yoga community. So not just instructors, but even practitioners and students also get confused quite often about what this is and what type of yoga they're practicing. People often ask, oh, what type of yoga do you practice? As if there's tons and tons of different types. And so again, there's, I think, just general lack of knowledge and awareness of what yoga is, where it came from, plays a big part in how the yoga narratives are being defined today. Okay, so we go on to the next. History of disassociation. When did this start? Well, historical efforts to kind of tease yoga apart from the Indian roots, of course, started when India began getting colonized. However, the changes were not just limited to the Muslim and the British rule. The change still continues with the advent of Buddhism, also kind of played a part in this. We see a huge movement in the West about, kind of taking anything good from the Indian subcontinent and kind of putting it under the Buddhist umbrella, while, it's the Hindus with their rituals and with their craziness that cannot be explained is kind of seen as a negative thing. So I want to point this out under this particular bullet point, that the disassociation is still ongoing. It did not stop with India getting its independence. So pointing that out. So globalization and cultural appropriation. The US spends billions of dollars, yes, B with a B, like billion with a B, on yoga. It's not just yoga related things, yoga mats, crystals, you name it, yoga underwear. This is huge business. Yoga apps. One of the biggest meditation apps is like the highest grossing apps out there. So yoga is an industry. Again, modern yoga, or American yoga, you want to call it in the West, focuses on fitness and health. And this, again, has further disassociated it from its authentic roots. Yoga has become a commodified product. And we just see that this is just a capitalistic venture in many places. We see with cat yoga and dog yoga. Let's chug a beer and try to do Rikshasana. Can we hold the pose or not? These are the things we see in the marketplace. So again, markets can't be regulated in a way, but of course, some knowledge can be injected into the system to show that there's nothing authentic about, partaking in drinking and then kind of trying to attempt yoga poses. I mean, this is Can you just imagine the degree of disconnect that has occurred with yoga? Again, we see, yes, cultural appropriation of yoga, kind of, it's been taken up and changed in some ways. But there are also counter movements where we see some Christian yoga practitioners saying, yeah, well, we can change the hood of the car, but the engine still is Hindu, meaning the yoga is still associated with its Hindu roots. We can pretend to change the exterior, but that doesn't change where the roots are from. So we see some counterculture movements to cultural appropriation, and that is very interesting. But then that also kind of sometimes gets taken to the extreme where people are kind of arguing whether non-Indians should become yoga teachers or should be teaching yoga to other people. So again, there's a lot of politicking involved in the practice of yoga. So we talked about cultural appropriation, but one other thing is cultures continuously changed. Cultures do change, and they are flexible, ever changing. So what our traditional notions change over time. And so we hope that a little bit of awareness towards yoga will kind of change it for the better. But for now, it's a contentious issue and with a direct impact on its authentic roots. Next slide, please. So the bottom line, and I don't have bullet points underneath it, the bottom line is ownership and standardization. Again, you can have the best policy, and I do think Ayush has some standardized verbiage and language given on the website and whatnot, but there needs to be an active role in disseminating this information to where people say, hey, this is what the Indians think, meaning this is where it originated from, and this is the authentic source, and this is where we go to find some answers. So that needs to be done. What we see in the West is many organizations have kind of taken it upon themselves to standardize and regulate yoga practices, yoga teacher trainings, and things like that. And while that might be needed, I think India has a big role to play, especially in times where yoga is just going to boom. Can you imagine American Tai Chi? Can you imagine the Chinese being okay with the narrative being built where there's American Tai Chi? Probably not, because again, I mean, not to go into the politics of how China treats culture versus India does, but there needs to be a little more stronghold, a little more direction from India in ownership and standardization. Now I want to jump into the legal issues, which again are connected to point number 8, but there are 3 different types of issues that we usually see with yoga. There are disputes with copyright information and trademark kind of issues, which we saw in, for example, if you guys remember the Bikram lawsuit. He said he has a patent over sequences and no one else can do those sequences, and then the court did not uphold that. So intellectual property issues, liability issues where people get hurt and whatnot. But of course, in the West, there's a Good Samaritan clause where some people know that, I mean, this is liability won't affect them too much because the yoga teachers and whatnot are protected in some ways. And the third thing we've seen, especially in 2015 in the US, was this religious freedom issue where a foundation kind of gave a chunk of money to a school district to teach yoga, and then some people were not okay with that and sued. And the courts said that yoga is a non-religious but spiritual practice. So that kind of set the tone for how yoga is treated in the American system, especially in the American school system, where a lot of behavioral research actually happens because children, youth, adolescents are often suffering from anxiety, depression, stress, and whatnot. And yoga is seen as a non-invasive, effective, cost-effective tool as well in terms of helping with some of those states. So here, legal issues arise if yoga practice is closely tied to a religious or spiritual belief, and some examples of the court cases that I talked about are listed here. So we'll move on to the next slide. And again, the legal issues, I mean, the bottom line of this is lack of clear definition might lead to this. I know that's very simplistic, but something to think about. If there was a clear definition of what yoga is and what it isn't, and what people can do with it or not. I mean, people, of course, should not be patenting sequences, right? But this needs to come from the root, the parent, where this particular practice originated. And I want to take a little side note and say the same thing is true for Ayurveda. A lot of plants and herbal medicines are being patented left and right, even though our ancient sages and rishis and whatnot never did any of that. But something to look into. I mean, this is not going to go away, is what I'm trying to say. Here again, ownership and standardization. Individual organizations, both Indian and non-Indian, file patents claiming ancient Indian knowledge. And one little good thing that has happened with this digitalization is there are some efforts to digitalize ancient books, ancient texts, ancient remedies, ancient recipes, whatnot, and kind of seeing that, hey, so these do exist, they have existed, right? Turmeric latte is not a new thing. We've been drinking haldi milk since centuries. So kind of, I mean, just I'm giving a flippant example, but just to get the point across. So some of these things hopefully can clear up, standardization can clear up some of the debated issues and questions that are always rising in terms of what are traditional practices versus what are people inventing on their own. One of the last things in politics that I want to talk about is the piracy wars. Again, I kind of alluded to this before when said the Bikram yoga case, trying to copyright sequences. Another thing I want to bring up here is also just the constant narrative building to where taking out the term Hindu or Indian and then kind of injecting the term South Asian, taking out the term Hindu or Indian, putting Buddhist instead of dhyana, dharana, Sanskrit terms, kind of putting the term mindfulness. These are active efforts that are going on in academia and otherwise, some known, much of it unknown due to lack of awareness. And again, there's a huge gap that exists and someone's filling it. So again, hint, hint, government of India, step up your game because some of these things are just totally getting hijacked. So efforts like Traditional Knowledge Digital Library, which is an initiative kind of hoping to prevent the privatization of ancient yogic and medicinal systems that were supposed to be for all and not for profit-making purposes. Next slide, please. So that's it. So in summary, some of the commercialization and the globalization of yoga and the academic challenges and the policy as is with not agreed upon definitions have led to complex cultural and legal issues and lots of debates surrounding ownership, standardization, and ethical implications of basically commodifying an ancient knowledge for profit and for distortion. So I want to end with this. And if you have any questions, we can do that. That's all I have.
Thank you very much for that talk, Anjali ji. We will open the floor for questions now. And as the audience warms up, I will reiterate one of the questions that I had asked you long back, ma'am, regarding a lot of African American people having this very strong connection to Egypt. And so them saying that there is this cultural attachment they have with what they would call Kemetic yoga, which they say predates what would be Hindu yoga or Indian yoga. So with the kind of sway that this particular community has on the politics of America, do you think that is going to be a narrative that may take on eventually?
I think, I think I had pointed out there have been a lot of indigenous movements all over the world, which is a very positive thing. Yoga being more ancient in Egypt than India, I doubt it, but that is my personal opinion. I cannot prove that this way or the next. But I think even there, some of the narratives from ancient Egypt, pre-Islamic Egypt, have been suppressed in the terms where pyramids are glorified, but the temples have not received the attention that they should have received. Not even being an anthropologist or anything close to an archaeologist, we see that one of the names for Suryadev is Ravi. We see Ra, right? Of course, there's a connection somewhere. Of course, perhaps our people who were the ones who helped build some of those temples. But so even those movements, if we see, are not getting as much traction as they possibly should. Indigenous movements are, again, the good and the bad. I think a lot of, thanks to Twitter and social media, a lot of these things are kind of coming up. I see a lot of that happening in Mexico and Latin America as well. And those pyramids too. And there's obviously something to it. There's something spiritual to it. And so I think in terms of what is older than what, that debate is a smaller, I think, as compared to like, hey, indigenous cultures actually did exist before Abrahamic religions took over the world, or attempted to take over most of the world. So that's how I would answer that.
Well, I think that brings us to the end of the session. Thank you very much, ma'am. It is close to midnight from where you
Yes.
are taking this session from. And I am very thankful to you for talking about a very important topic like this and enlightening us on how exactly the Indian government needs to do more in terms of the global image that yoga is developing over time. As you said, yoga is here to stay. Thank you very much. And I look forward to having many such sessions with you. Namaste.